Good morning. Welcome to Great Decisions. It's my pleasure today to introduce Dr. Douglas Forsythe, who is an associate professor in the history department at Long Beach State University. Dr. Forsythe is author of The Crisis of Liberal Italy, Monetary and Financial Policy, 1913 to 1922. He is co-editor of The Origins of National Financial Systems, Alexander Search Reconsidered, and of Regime Changes, Macroeconomic Policy and Financial Regulation in Europe from the 1930s to the 1990s. Prior to joining the Bowling Green faculty, Dr. Forsythe taught at Princeton University and the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. As an affiliate at the Center for European Studies at Harvard University, he co-chaired the Italian Studies Group. Well,
Is it working?
I don't hear it.
Okay. The light is on now. Okay, can you hear me? Good. So, thank you. I've been doing talks in this series now for about 5 years, I think. And every year in this program, they give a talk which is supposed to orient the audience about future developments. It's an important area of international affairs. Every year I have less confidence in my ability to see very far into the future. And this year I'm the one who chose this topic, Trump's tariffs and trade, as a subject of my talk. I was struck by a New York Times editorial published back on the 5th of September 2025, titled, quote, Trump thought he was leading on trade, no one is following. The editorial describes how other nations, including those constituting the European Union, are continuing to try to strike trade deals around the world within multilateral formats with every country except the United States. On the 22nd of December 2025, the Times published another article written by Emma Butola and Lucia Cholakian Herrera about Argentina, under Trump's ally Javier Milei, is dismantling his country's long-standing regime of high tariffs and letting in cheap imports, including from Chinese brands like Temu and Shine. What makes this particularly striking is that Argentina is stabilizing the value of its exchange markets with the help of a $20 billion swap agreement with the United States Treasury. Think about this for a moment. The Trump administration has made available to Argentina, a country with perhaps the world's most enduring reputation for defaulting on international loans repeatedly, a very substantial sum of money to sustain the stability of its currency. And Argentina is using this aid to move the country's tariff policy in the exact opposite direction that Trump itself is pursuing in the United States, allowing Chinese imports to sweep into Argentina. I hope to tell you something interesting today, but I'm afraid I can't make President Trump's economic policies intelligible because they don't make any sense to me. But maybe we need to back up here a bit. Why is Trump extolling the wisdom of President William McKinley's high tariff regime at the beginning of the 20th century? Why suggest in the U.S. commitment to open trade that has been a constant of U.S. government policy since the era of Franklin Delano Roosevelt and Cordell Hull, his Secretary of State? And how does Trump's trade policy fit into his broader approach to foreign policy? Why is Trump intent on dismantling the web of multilateral organizations that have served as the exoskeleton of America's international power since World War II, including the United Nations, NATO, and the Group of Seven? What on earth is going on, and how is the rest of the world reacting to this seismic shift in American foreign policy? Well, most of us, the multilateralism has allowed other nations to take advantage of the United States. At first glance, it's far from clear that other nations have taken a very thorough advantage of the United States. And now I have that first link up there. Yeah, let's see if we can load that. You have to press control. Shit, baby. You got the control.
No.
Hey, bro. You scroll up, well, this here we see the top 10 economies in the world, right? You'll notice the United States has 1/4 of world GDP, right? And oops, and it's followed by China, right? With here, it says 19%. That's less than I have, or a bit more than I have. But you get the basic story, right? Those are the world's 10 largest economies. And allegedly, that one that constitutes 1/4 of the whole is being taken advantage of, right? By the other. Not only does the United States have the top spot, but 6 of the next 9 countries, the 9 largest economies, belong to nations that were closely aligned with the United States, at least back before the 21st of January 2025, when we still had some meaningful sense allies. Now, if we look at per capita GDP, the situation doesn't change much. And I think I've got another link for per capita GDP on my. Yeah, scroll down because we're gonna get to a table. Yeah, there, okay. Let's, do the first, there's the first 20 largest, or richest countries, I guess, in the world, right, according to the IMF. And you can see here that the United States does not have the top spot. It's true, there's a handful of city-states with large financial sectors like Luxembourg and Singapore and Switzerland, and also Norway, which has 5.6 million people and enormous oil and natural gas reserve. Norway is sometimes called the Protestant Kuwait. Maybe the talent, right? Also Ireland, which is noteworthy, because it used to be one of the poorest countries in Europe, but it's grown rich partly by playing host to subsidiaries of American multinational corporations in the high-tech field, right? For example, Facebook, Microsoft, all those companies have their European offices. But the United States clearly dominates the tables with respect to other countries with larger economies and larger populations. If we take those 10 largest economies in the world, which I showed you a minute ago, Germany has a per capita income of 59,925. I think I've got that figure. Let's go back now to my first table on my sheet there. Yeah, let's bring this table up. Just scroll down so that this table is on the screen. Yeah, there you go. Little bit more. No, a little bit the other way. There you go. Okay. So the first figure, the first column there is per capita income, right? You can see American per capita income compared to the per capita incomes of the other 9 largest economies in the world. I mean, it's just ridiculous, right? Germany is in second place, right? It has 66.9% of Americans per capita income, followed by Britain, which has about 63% of Americans per capita income, and eventually by China, at $13,800, because, 15.4% of America's per capita income. So allegedly, all these countries are screwing the United States, right? You can see how badly they're screwing us. They're screwing us so badly that the Chinese have 15% of our per capita income. How dare they do that? It's just outrageous. Now, it's true that one of Trump's other charges is that our allies freeload on us because they spend less on defense. And they do. According to the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, the United States in 2024, can you bring that graph up to it's this one right here, this one.
Yep.
A little bit funkier than I thought it was going to be. Okay, that's good. And we can see the top military spenders, right? So the United States spent in 2024 $997 billion on defense. That's 37% of all the defense expenditure in the world, right? And 3.4% of America's GDP. In second place among the countries with the 10 biggest economies is China, with $314 billion in military expenditure, 12% of the world total, but only 1.7% of China's GDP. Now, NATO countries have committed themselves to spend 10% of GDP on defense by 2024 and 5% by 2035. The big countries in NATO are all behind the US on this metric. Britain and France is over 2%. Germany is almost there at 1.9. Italy drags behind at 1.6. Japan at 1.4. And Canada at 1.1. And by the way, the Canadians had better watch out because they have a large neighbor whose peaceful intentions can no longer be taken for granted. Among the world's 10 largest economies, Russia, not surprisingly, spends the largest share of its GDP on the military, about 7%. The countries around the world that spend a larger share of their total economy on the military are the ones you guessed, right? Ukraine at 34% for obvious reasons, Israel at 8.8%, Algeria at 8%, Saudi Arabia at 7.3%. The only other countries in the world that spend more on defense than the United States are Kuwait, 4.8%, and Poland, 4.2%. Until recently, I think one could plausibly argue that the United States was spending money on defense to provide security to its allies, and that the burden sharing was a serious issue. Today, I'm inclined to wonder whether American military expenditure is purely defensive in character and not in support of imperialistic projects. Presumably. But even looking at defense expenditure is not getting us very far in understanding why Trump is tearing up an open trade regime and raising tariffs to levels lasting in the 1920s. He's not doing this on a whim. He's been obsessed with the United States' large trade deficit since the 1980s. And he's been a vocal public advocate of high tariffs since 1988. What obsessed him then and obsesses him still is the size of America's trade deficit. Now, one peculiarity about Trump's obsession with the US trade deficit, and let's go back to that, the first big table on top of my sheet there. It's like the trade deficits on there too. The world's 10 largest economies, yeah, in the last column. One peculiarity about this obsession with US trade deficit is that he particularly obsesses with the merchandise trade deficit, which looks larger in the case of the United States because of a lot of our exports are in services. So what's wrong with paying for merchandise purchased, say, from China with the earnings of American professionals who earn fees on projects in China? If you're curious about what Americans are doing in China, take a look sometime at Wikipedia lists the tallest buildings in that country and check out who the architects are. They're mostly European and American firms. It just seems ridiculous to me to look at merchandise trade deficits apart from trying to figure out what's going on in Trump's brain. So I'll ignore them. We're going to look at both merchandise and service, right? We'll look at the net trade figures. Now, if we look at deficits and surpluses in trade in goods and services, and I managed to find World Bank figures for 2024, the United States had a deficit of $903.5 billion, so almost $1 trillion, far and away the largest negative balance among our 10 largest economies, and indeed among all the world's countries. India was in second place at 100 billion. Surprisingly, at least to me, Japan was in third place at 42 billion, because for a long time they had a huge structural trade surplus. Britain in fourth place, 32 billion. China had the largest surplus. According to those World Bank figures, 539 billion is what I've got here on my chart. In other reading I've done for this presentation, I've discovered that the Chinese export surplus for 2025 is actually in excess of $1 trillion. So it's not as large as the American trade deficit. Second in the size of the surplus in 2024 is Germany at 179 billion, followed by Russia at 93 and Italy at 54. Now, if the country runs trade deficits year after year, sooner or later it's going to get into trouble. It may have to borrow money or sell assets to make up the difference. At some point, foreigners may become unwilling to acquire any more debt from a country with a huge structural trade deficit. Moreover, these large structural trade deficits tend to emerge in tandem with large government budget deficits. And that's certainly been the case with the United States. For World War I until the Reagan era, the United States had the largest net financial creditor position in the world economy. And since then, it's become the world's largest debtor. And in fact, before World War I, the United States was also the world's largest debtor, right? And in just a few years of huge trade surpluses with the European belligerents, right? In World War I, we flipped from being the world's largest debtor nation to being the world's largest creditor nation, right? We held on to that position all the way up until the presidency of Ronald Reagan. Both the U.S. trade and budget deficits are high and unsustainable. You can't go around running huge budget and trade deficits forever. Most economists think they're also related. If you want to cut the trade deficit, try cutting the budget deficit. But Trump doesn't care about the budget deficit, at least when he's in office. When Democrats are in office, Republicans agonize over the budget deficit and demand draconian cuts in government spending. When Republicans regain office, they cut taxes and spend like sailors. Cutting a government, curing a government debt problem with tariffs is nothing. It's true that tariff revenues have soared since Trump's Liberation Day, the 2nd of April, 2025. Astute observers have pointed out that it's going to be hard for any future administration to claw the tariffs back, given how hard it is to raise other kinds of taxes, especially taxes on rich people in this country, in this day and age. This is a real problem. We no longer seem to be capable of taxing rich people. Tariffs do act like a partial sales tax. Obviously they tax that share of consumption that involves imports. And that's about 1/10 the total in our case today. So it will depress demand and total spending. Some observers have pointed out that the Trump tariffs act a bit like the value-added taxes, or VAT, right? That figure prominently in the fiscal systems of European countries. And that this is a way to depress consumption and increase government revenue. It's a highly regressive form of taxation. If you're taxing consumption, the poor pay more, right? Because they consume a larger share of their income. But the rich save some of their income, right? And therefore they don't pay tax on the part they're saving, right? If you're taxing consumption. It's just, the burden of taxation disproportionately on the backs of the poor. You might think that as the non-college educated electorate increasingly votes MAGA, the Trump administration will respond by taking its interests into account, but that's evidently not happening. During Trump's first administration, it appeared that he would use tariffs primarily as an instrument for curbing China's economic and strategic power. China has emerged over the past few decades as the world's leading manufacturing power. According to the World Bank, China had 27.7% of world manufacturing capacity in 2024, followed by the United States at 17%. I think I've got that too. It's a little bit, it's on the next page here at the bottom. The shares of world manufacturing capacity are right there. So you can see these are mostly the same 10 countries, right? There are a few, but Mexico and South Korea were not on the list of the 10 largest economies. But you can see that when it comes to manufacturing, China now exceeds the United States by a substantial amount, right? As a share of world manufacturing capacity. The overlap with the GDP ratings is considerable, but note that China is leading here. When China began its dizzying rise to become the world's leading manufacturer in the 1980s, some observers hope that its embrace of market economics would be followed by an embrace of liberal democratic politics. Well, obviously that hasn't happened. And if you regard China as a strategic competitor and potential future adversary, you might become uneasy about its rise as a manufacturing giant. And in particular, you might become uneasy about relying on China as a major supplier of key inputs into your own economy. This did indeed seem to drive Trump's China policy in his first presidential administration to some extent, but not so much over the past year in which Trump's second administration has unfolded. Now, if the United States wanted to fight and win a trade war with China, many observers have pointed out it should have drawn upon its good relations with other countries, including its long-standing allies, to create a common front. Instead of this, the Trump administration has slapped tariffs on former allies, former foes, strategic competitors, and neutral countries alike. The trade war has been conducted against the entire world, including Canada, Mexico, the EU, and long-standing Asian friends, including Japan, South Korea, Australia, and New Zealand. Trump's personal grudges and grievances have found their way into his tariff policy. He put extra high tariffs on Brazil to punish the government of Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva for prosecuting his predecessor, Jair Bolsonaro, for plotting a coup after losing an election. Familiar. He put extra high tariffs on India because Prime Minister Narendra Modi disputed his absurd claims that he had successfully mediated the end of a war between India and Pakistan. He broke trade talks with Mark Carney, the Canadian Prime Minister, because Doug Ford, who is Mark Carney's principal domestic rival in the Canadian political system, and also who is the Premier of Ontario, a leading figure in the Progressive Conservative Party, right? Whereas Carney leads the Liberal Party, right? Ford put an ad on television quoting Ronald Reagan denouncing tariffs, and Trump was infuriated and broke off talks with Carney. That would be like someone breaking off talks with Trump because of something that Gavin Newsom did, Where all of this is anyone's guess, but one result seems pretty clear already. The United States has already lost the trade war with China. Okay? U.S. imports and Chinese manufacturers are falling, it's true. But China has actually widened its export surplus with the rest of the world over the course of 2025. In fact, I think it's doubled it, basically. With the United States pursuing an erratic and unpredictable trade policy, other countries have seized upon China as an anchor of stability in an uncertain world. Instead of assembling a coalition to challenge China's domination of world manufacturing, the United States has conducted a trade war against the entire world, driving everybody else closer to China, including Canadians, right? We just signed a major trade agreement with China. This agreement, signed in January 2026, is a 3-year deal, opens China substantially to Canadian agricultural exports, and opens Canada to Chinese electric vehicle imports. China has actually demonstrated that it holds better cards in conducting a trade war than the United States does. The United States sought to put the squeeze on China's acquisition of advanced chips used in artificial intelligence. The Chinese demonstrated that they were achieving results in AI with less sophisticated chips comparable to the leading US AI engine. Moreover, Trump was forced to make deals with the Saudis and the Gulf Emirates that punched a big hole in the United States' ability to prevent third parties from obtaining its most advanced chips. Then the Chinese seriously put the squeeze on the United States' ability to acquire rare earth minerals. Rare earth minerals are vital to advanced manufacturing and IT and defense industries. China mined 69, I've got a table here of the rare earth mineral production. This is the last one. It's right down here on the next page. There we go. China mined 69% of the world's output of rare earths in 2024. The United States at most 11.6%, Myanmar 8%, Australia 3.3%, Thailand 3%, Nigeria 3%. At this point, and now we're talking about November 2025, a couple of months ago, right? Trump cried uncle. He reached an agreement with Xi Jinping, reducing U.S. tariff on Chinese goods to about the same level we imposed on our former close allies, and pretty much gave up trying to keep American logic chips out of Chinese hands, in exchange for China temporarily extending the supply of rare earths. This isn't the end of the story, naturally, but it's the end of any illusion that the United States could back China into a corner in a trade war. So what is Trump's trade war with the rest of the world likely to accomplish? Trump has claimed that foreign exporters, not American consumers, will pay for his tariffs. This is, of course, ridiculous. Many of you will have seen the recent article in the Wall Street Journal reporting on research undertaken by the Kiel Institute in Germany that finds that 94% of U.S. tariffs between January 2024 and November 2025 were paid by American consumers. Trump also claims his tariffs are going to lead to a revival of manufacturing in the United States and secure future prosperity. Nearly all professional economists beg to differ. The Peterson Institute for International Economics, which strongly favors free trade, estimated on the 1st of October 2025 that the tariffs would result in less U.S. economic output, higher U.S. prices, and lower American wages than if they had not been adopted. Employment would decline in the sectors most exposed to trade, with the biggest drops in durable goods manufacturing, mining, and agriculture. The Peterson Institute critics have slowed down investment in the U.S. economy. The scale of the effect is not devastating in the short run. The Peterson Institute predicts that tariffs will reduce the U.S. growth rate by 0.23% from the baseline in 2025 and 0.62% in 2026. It predicts inflation 1% higher than the baseline starting on the 11th of September 2025, and then falling since the tariffs should have a one-off effect on prices, not an accelerating effect if they're stable, right? The Peterson Institute goes on to state that these tariffs are not sufficient to cause the U.S. recession, but the U.S. economy would contract if the tariffs were combined with the mass deportation of unauthorized immigrant workers and the U.S. Federal Reserve's loss of political independence. It regarded mass deportations and the loss of that independence to be larger shocks to the economy than the tariffs. This reminds us that the tariffs are not the only innovation in economic policy making that the Trump administration has introduced, perhaps not even the most important in terms of changing key economic indicators in the short run. The drama of the AI investment boom is playing out at the same time as the effects of Trump's tariffs, and it is likely to have a considerable effect on the U.S. and world economies as a whole. Experts predict major upheavals in the labor market. Some tech experts feel that AI could also end humanity. I just don't have the expertise to evaluate these claims. Many observers also worry about overinvestment in AI producing a financial bubble, which will be followed by an international financial crisis. Now, formation makes me more appreciative of the dangers of a financial crisis than the dangers of machines taking over the world. I guess that could happen, but I can't begin really, think about that intelligently. I'm not sure we're facing a financial crisis because of overinvestment in AI, although it sure looks like it should be. As a student of the history of financial crises, however, I'm appreciative of how hard it is to predict them in advance. I do feel that we ought to allow for the possibility that the breaking of an AI investment bubble might cause a global financial crisis that could swamp the macroeconomic effects of Trump's tariff wars in the near future. Financial crises in the past have been mitigated by ad hoc cooperation among the world's leading central bankers. This cooperation rests on the basis of trust, which central bankers build during periods of calm. Donald J. Trump has dedicated his political career to undermining trust, nationally and internationally. He has also done everything he can to discredit the U.S. Federal Reserve System and its leadership. In the world seen through the glass darkly, it does seem that this will make ad hoc central bank cooperation to cope with the financial crisis next to impossible. This could be a bigger deal than the tariffs. It's intriguing to consider how the rest of the world is reacting to these tariffs. So far, we've already seen how the Chinese reacted, right? They reacted by grabbing Trump by that thing that he mentioned in his having solid water. So far, it's unclear, as I noted at the beginning of this talk, that the rest of the world has much stomach to emulate Trump by declaring or engaging in tariff wars. Only a handful of major players in the world trading system have enough market clout to even try to coerce their major trading partners into accepting unequal trade treaties as the United States has done. In fact, probably only China and the European Union fall into that category. China certainly manages its trade, but it has actually increased its exports over the past year, becoming more, not less, trade dependent. The European Union, along with many of the world's other major traders, have remained committed to multilateralism and reciprocity. Richard Baldwin, who is one of the most insightful scholars of international trade today, titled a recent Substack post, quote, "America will walk off the pitch. Why didn't the world trade game end?" This was published back on the 29th of August, 2025. And he comments, "It was as if the referee walked off the pitch, leaving the players to decide between two choices. Start arguing and fighting among themselves, or carry on and start self-refereeing. As it turned out, the players really like the game. They do not share President Trump's grievances. When the system architect, America, turned arsenal, the rest of the world chose to fight the fire, not with more fire, but with fire breaks. Until now, social scientists have often assumed that cooperative multilateral systems require a hegemonic leader to come into being and to persist. When they detected a relative decline of the weight of the United States in international affairs in the 1980s, they wondered whether common interests might keep these systems working with a declining hegemon. Now we shall see what happens when the hegemon turns arsenic, in Richard Baldwin's words. Baldwin suggests that leadership births might replace the hegemon. And as an example, he points to how when Trump walked away from the Trans-Pacific Partnership in 2017, Japan quietly rallied partners and refashioned it into the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership. When the U.S. crippled the World Trade Organization's body, the EU assembled a coalition of willing members to create a multi-party interim arrangement that kept dispute settlement alive. The EU has gone on negotiating reciprocal trade agreements, even after signing an agreement at Trump's Turnberry golf course that made substantial concessions to the United States. This summer, the EU completed an agreement with Indonesia that reduced tariffs to 0 on 80% of imports. As you're probably aware, the EU and Mercosur officially signed a long-awaited trade agreement in Paraguay on the 17th of January 2026, marking the conclusion of over 25 years of negotiations. The deal, covering Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay, and Uruguay, is now under review by the European courts with verdict uncertain. Talks continue between the EU and India and Australia. Canada is engaged in free trade talks with the ASEAN countries of Southeast Asia. Japan is negotiating with the Gulf states. Britain has signed a trade deal with India. Much of the world seems to be betting that Trump's tariffs will make the United States poorer rather than richer. Much of the rest of the world is guessing that high volumes of relatively open trade are here to stay, and that emulating Trump would be a fool's gambit. Trump can cause a lot of damage, he can overturn, but he can't overturn cause and effect relationships governing how nations grow, rich, or decline. So that's my take.
You touched on something briefly that I think is going to be very important, the crash and burn of AI. It's already crashed and burned one time, and this was back in the late 70s and early 80s. If you have some students that are looking for extra credit, send them to the library, have them take a look at Life magazine and Look magazine between 1975 and 1985. And you're going to find one of them that devoted an entire issue to AI. And I was reading it and asked myself, where in the heck have you been? All the stuff that's going on, these computers, if we could double the speed of the computers, they will start to think on their own. But then I grabbed the same magazine 3 months later and looked at letters to the editor. And all of these people that were quoted on the massive reach of AI were writing letters saying, I never said that. I've been misquoted. And it sure enough crashed after that. So AI is just a very, very dangerous area.
The financial crisis is really hard. I think there are a couple of people who are kind of good at this. I'm not one of them. So
Here's a quote for you.